What would you do when faced with the relentless gaze of an empire that doesn't just conquer lands but devours souls? Think you're tough enough to survive a single day in the Ottoman Empire? Think again. Your smartphone won't save you here. Instagram filters don't exist when the Sultan's guards are sharpening their blades just outside your door, and a misstep in the bazaar could cost you your head. Picture this: vibrant markets alive with the clash of exotic spices and fervent bartering, a heady mix of allure and danger swirling like a storm. But beneath the glimmer lies a truth darker than the ink on parchment. Betrayal waits in the shadows, whispering sweet nothings that could seal your fate faster than a harem's seductive smile. Would you dare to trust a smiling merchant when a quick glance could betray your very existence? In this world, every pact is a potential noose. Alliances shift like sand in an hourglass, and loyalty is a currency that crumbles when the stakes rise. One moment, you're sipping a viscous cup of strong Turkish coffee, buoyed by the warmth that seems to promise safety. The next, you're racing through bustling alleyways, heart pounding, as rumors of your treachery spread like wildfire. You'd be just another shadow lost in a labyrinth of intrigue, where everyone wears a mask and the truth is the most dangerous game of all. Can you hear the laughter of the elite echoing through the palace halls, a chorus of decadence underpinned by brutality? The Ottoman court is no place for the faint of heart. It's a gladiatorial arena draped in silk, where the only rule is to outsmart, outmaneuver, and outlive. Think you'd charm your way into the heart of a sultan? Good luck! You'd need more than charisma when jealousy and ambition wield knives sharper than your wits. And let's not forget about the whims of fate. Ill fortune strikes with the ferocity of a thunderclap as enemies hide behind every opulent tapestry. One wrong gaze, one miscalculated bow, and you could find yourself a guest at a banquet that ends with your head on a platter, served up as a cautionary tale to the next ambitious fool. Time ticks away in a world where the tapestry of history spins with blood and glory. You might think you know power, but the Ottoman Empire redefined it, where the sultans didn't just rule, they crafted legends, and every legend came with a body count. You think you can navigate this treacherous landscape? Buckle up. The moment you step into this world, you'll realize that every choice is a dance with death, one misstep and the music stops. So, are you ready to confront the grim reality of your own mortality? Or will you turn back, the weight of your fear crushing your resolve? The empire awaits, and it's hungry for more than just your participation, it craves your very essence. The air was thick with dust and desperation, and the distant sound of clashing swords reverberated in the heart of the Anatolian plains. A figure stood in the shadows, the dying light of day framing his silhouette against the crimson sky. Osman I, the young leader of a small principality, felt the weight of 1,000 dreams crashing down upon him. He was not just a man, he was the flickering hope of a people caught between the ambitions of greedy neighbors and the ghosts of a shattered past. The world felt like it was tearing apart at the seams, and he was standing at the precipice, ready, or perhaps not, ready to leap into the void. His breath quickened, heart pounding like a war drum in his chest. All around him, warriors gripped their swords with white-knuckled intensity, eyes wide with fear, yet shining with the belief that they could change destiny. The air smelled of sweat and iron, and beneath it all lingered a sharp, metallic tang that hinted at the blood soon to be spilled. They were a motley crew, these men, some barely old enough to grow a beard, others grizzled and weathered, their faces lined with stories of survival. They were brothers in arms, yet each held a private fear, a trembling uncertainty that gnawed at their resolve. What if this is all for nothing, they must have thought, but not a word escaped their lips. Among them was a man named Ertugrul, Osman's father, a warrior with the fire of 10 lives, yet chained by the burden of expectation. He looked at his son with a mix of pride and despair, knowing that the boy would either rise as a king or fall as a martyr. The world is a wicked place, Osman. We carve our legacy with blood and sacrifice, he whispered, voice barely audible over the chaos. Osman felt the heat of those words seep into his soul, bitter and intoxicating. The darkness of a father's love and the weight of legacy pressed down upon him like a leaden cloak. But tonight, as the sun bled into the horizon, something primal stirred within Osman. The fear that had kept him shackled to tradition began to burn away, replaced by an insatiable desire for more than just survival, more than just a name. He wanted an empire. An empire born from the embers of his ambition, forged in the fires of battle and steeled by the loyalty of his men. Would that ambition be the monster that devoured him whole? Just then, an arrow whistled through the air, slicing the tension like a scythe. It struck a soldier beside Osman, a boy named Ali, whose laughter had filled the camp hours before. In that fleeting moment, time slowed. The world became a canvas painted in shades of horror and disbelief. Ali crumpled, eyes wide, the sparkle of youth extinguished like a candle snuffed by a cruel wind. Osman felt the weight of grief crash over him, heavy and suffocating. He remembered the boy's laughter, his dreams of glory, and how they'd all seemed so ludicrous just a heartbeat ago. I remember, he thought, when dreams were just whispers in the night. But those whispers had turned into a scream now, a scream for vengeance. The air crackled with tension as Osman turned his gaze to the enemy, a swarm of faces twisted in rage and hunger. He could see them as more than just shadows, they were flesh and blood, driven by the same desires that burned in his own heart. Fear turned to fury, and in that instant, Osman became something more, he became a force of nature. "Charge!" he roared, voice booming like thunder. With that single word, he shattered the chains that bound him, and his men surged forward, fueled by the fire of his conviction. They clashed against the enemy like waves against a rocky shore, fierce and relentless. The sounds of battle echoed, a cacophony of cries and steel, a symphony of chaos. Osman fought with the fury of 1,000 storms, each swing of his sword a desperate plea to carve a place in history. In the melee, he caught glimpses of men falling like leaves in autumn, their dreams shattered, their stories unfinished. Yet, for every soul lost, Osman felt the tenacious grip of possibility tighten around his heart. Victory or death, the two danced together in a macabre waltz, a seductive promise that echoed through the depths of his being. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the shadows lengthened, stretching and twisting like the fears that haunted him. The battle raged on, chaotic yet strangely beautiful, a brutal ballet of courage and loss. He fought not just for land, but for a name, a legacy, a chance to rise above the ashes of mediocrity. Yet with every victory came the gnawing realization that the price of ambition was steep, and the ghosts of the fallen would forever haunt his steps. Osman stumbled, breathless, as he caught a glimpse of Ertugrul, fighting valiantly yet weighed down by the years. The old warrior was a monument to resilience, but even monuments crumble when the earth shifts beneath them. "Father!" Osman shouted, but the cry fell into the chaos, lost in the tumult of battle. Time seemed to stretch cruelly, moments dragging like lead while adrenaline coursed through his veins, pushing him forward, deeper into the fray. And then it happened, a moment that would taste of iron and regret. In the midst of the chaos, Osman found himself face to face with a rival, a fierce warrior whose eyes burned with the same wild ambition. They fought, a dance of death, each strike a conversation, each feint a paragraph in a tale only they could understand. Osman could hear his heartbeat, a relentless metronome counting down to what felt like an inevitable conclusion. Would he strike true, or would he lay down his life, just as Ali had? The clash of their swords was a symphony of iron, a brutal serenade that echoed through the night. With every swing, Osman felt his conviction crystallize, but with every moment, he also sensed the weight of his choices pressing against his chest. In that brief, electrifying instant, he understood, power does not come from a blade or a throne, it blooms from the hearts of those willing to forge their destiny, no matter the cost. And in that realization, as shadows danced and spirits soared, Osman struck, the blade finding its mark. The rival crumpled, a broken dream, a whisper of what could have been. In that very moment of triumph, a hollow echo filled the void. Victory tasted like ash, the sweet nectar of ambition turning bitter in his mouth. I remember, he thought, when dreams felt distant and the world was but a canvas waiting for paint. The battle continued to rage, but Osman's heart was already racing toward the vast tapestry he would weave, a story that would entwine his fate with that of empires, a rise that would shape the very fabric of history. The ghosts of the fallen lingered, their whispers weaving through the night, a tapestry of loss, love, and an insatiable hunger for greatness. The empire was not yet born, but every heartbeat echoed with the promise of what was to come, an empire forged in the fires of ambition, love, and sacrifice, a journey that had only just begun. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the cobbled streets of Istanbul, the city a living tapestry woven with threads of laughter, despair, and the scent of spices. Somewhere, a child's cry pierced the midday haze, a sound of desperation that sent a shiver through the hearts of those who heard it. I remember that moment, the air thick with tension, the kind that was almost a living thing, crawling beneath the skin, whispering secrets of hunger and longing. In the narrow alleyways, where the dust danced with motes of light, a peasant named Eileen knelt over her patch of earth, fingers clawing at the soil, desperate to coax life from its stubborn depths. Her hands, calloused and cracked, ached with the weight of her toil, echoing the cries of her children waiting for supper. "What will they eat?" she whispered to the earth, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf caught in a storm. She remembered her mother's words, a mantra of survival: keep planting, keep hoping. But hope felt like a cruel joke when the sky offered no rain, just the unyielding glare of the sun, mocking her persistence. And yet, amid the clouds of despair, laughter erupted like a sudden summer storm from the workshop of her neighbor, an artisan named Kemal. He was a master of wood, fingers deftly shaping his creations, bending grains into forms that seemed alive. "Look!" A bird, he called, unveiling a whimsical carving that danced between reality and fantasy. Laughter bubbled from his lips, an intoxicating cocktail of joy and defiance. But the laughter faded, replaced by the haunting shadow of debt and expectation. "You must create, Kemal," his father's voice echoed in his mind, a ghost demanding perfection, a ghost that never left his side. "Each piece must be better than the last," he muttered, carving deeper, the knife biting into the wood that had once whispered stories of the forest. "But what if I fail?" The question hung in the air, a specter that followed him home, creeping into his dreams like a thief in the night. That evening, while Eileen's children picked at a bowl of watery porridge, each spoonful a reminder of their unfulfilled desires, she gazed towards the horizon, where the opulent palace of the Sultan loomed, a gilded beacon of power and wealth. It was a world apart, where nobles dined on feasts of roasted lamb and sweet-honeyed pastries, their laughter echoing through marbled halls, unburdened by the weight of the earth. One such noble, a young woman named Selin, perched on a balcony, her heart heavy with the knowledge of lives spent in toil, contrasting sharply with her own gilded cage. "My father says I am fortunate," she whispered to the evening breeze, her voice barely a sigh. "But what is fortune when it comes at the cost of others' despair?" She glanced down at the streets below, catching glimpses of Eileen and Kemal, their lives a stark reminder of the chasm that separated them. "I feel their pain like a phantom limb, haunting me, begging for acknowledgement." She longed to break free from her silken ties, to climb off her pedestal and walk among them, feel the earth beneath her feet, the pulse of life that thrummed in the streets. But the palace walls, though adorned with beauty, wrapped around her like a serpent, squeezing tighter with each passing day. Do they truly see me, or am I just a reflection of their fantasies? The night grew darker, the shadows deeper, weaving a tapestry of dreams and nightmares. Eileen, exhausted, fell asleep, visions of lush fields dancing in her mind, a stark contrast to the barren reality. Kemal, too, succumbed to the night, visions of exquisite carvings morphing into grotesque shapes, each a reminder of his inadequacy. Selin, wrapped in silks, stared at the moon, its cold light illuminating her internal struggle. The next day dawned, heavy with anticipation. Eileen's children had fallen ill, their laughter replaced by fevered whimpers. She rushed to the market, desperation clawing at her throat, her heart pounding like a war drum. "Please, just a few coins for bread," she pleaded, her voice cracking like ice. The stall owner, a man with sunken eyes and a heart hardened by years of hardship, shook his head. "There is no charity here, only survival." In another part of the city, Kemal unveiled his latest creation at a bustling bazaar, the scent of spices thick in the air like a promise of better days. The crowd gathered, their eyes alight with wonder, but as applause erupted, a whispered criticism slithered through. "He'll never be good enough." Kemal's heart sank, the shadows of doubt called around him, squeezing the breath from his lungs. What if they're right, he thought, the weight of expectation pressing down like an anvil on his chest. And in the palace, Selin prepared for a grand banquet, her heart as heavy as the ornate dress she donned. She watched her reflection, the mirror showing a smiling facade, while inside, a tempest roared. "What if I could change the world?" she pondered, her heart beating in rhythm with the distant cries of the city. What if I could bridge the chasm? As the banquet began, laughter filled the air like a haunting melody, the echoes of joy and despair entwined in a macabre dance. Eileen, with her children's needs gnawing at her soul, Kamal with his fear of inadequacy, and Selin with her yearning for change, they were all caught in a web spun of dreams and despair, each heartbeat a reminder of their struggles. As night fell, the moon hung high, casting a silver glow that illuminated the division between the wealthy and the poor, the dreams unfulfilled. They each stood on the precipice of their own lives, teetering between hope and despair, longing and fear. The darkness whispered secrets of what could be, the shadows of their past reaching out, begging for recognition. The city, alive with its stories, held its breath, waiting for a spark, a moment that would set them on a collision course with destiny. And so, as the clock ticked, marking time with its relentless rhythm, each life danced precariously on the edge of change, the air thick with unspoken words, the weight of existence pressing down, reminding them that in the heart of this empire, every pulse, every sigh, every moment mattered. Eileen, Kamal, Selin, three souls intertwined in the fabric of a world steeped in intensity, where every day felt like a battle, and every heartbeat was a prayer for something more. The midnight streets throbbed with tension, alive with whispers of anger. Children, barefoot and ragged, darted between shadows, their laughter a ghostly echo that faded into the cold night air. I stood rooted against the damp brick wall, heart racing, chest tight, as the shouts of the crowd swelled and crashed like a tidal wave, rising from the depths of desperation, a hunger for change, for justice, for something beyond the weight of oppression. A figure broke through the chaos, a woman with wild hair, streaked with the soot of the city, eyes aflame with fury. Her name was Ilara, and she was not just a face in the crowd, she was a force, embodied struggle swirling with haunting dreams. "They think we'll just lie down," she screamed, voice fierce enough to cut through the din, and I felt it pierce me, this raw, unforgiving truth. She was one of them, the overlooked, the ignored, but she wore her scars like armor. With every word, she dismantled walls that had stood for centuries, brick by brick. In that moment, I remembered my own fight, the one whispered in secret between the walls of my childhood home, where my mother's weary hands begged the universe for mercy. I watched her, day after day, pressing herself into the mold of servitude for a family that would never know her name, her sacrifice dissolving into the dust of their indifference. I remember, the words fell from my lips like ashes, scattering into the night. I remember the taste of dread, the fear that cloaked us like a second skin. Ilara's voice soared again, demanding to be heard. "You're not invisible," she cried, and the crowd surged forward, a collective wave of hope crashing against the cold indifference of the night. I felt the pull, the magnetic draw of her passion, as if she were calling out not just to the crowd, but to me, urging me to step out from the shadows and join her fight. The world we lived in, the hierarchy that governed every breath and heartbeat, was unforgiving, a monstrous beast that chewed up the weak and spat out the bones. A man stumbled into the fray, his hands trembling, shirt stained with the remnants of yesterday's labor. Matt. His eyes held stories, stories of long hours in a factory, of dreams deferred. I could see it painted on his skin, the suffering etched into his very being, a canvas of disappointment and grit. "What can we do?" he asked, voice cracking under the weight of his reality. "What can we do against the rich?" "Everything!" Ilara shouted, fire igniting in her soul. "We rise. We fight. Together." Her words wove through the air, wrapping around Matt's fragile spirit, and I could feel him straighten slightly, a faint spark kindling within him. But oh, the fear that clung to him like a shadow. He had grown accustomed to the silence, to the suffocating weight of submission. As the crowd swelled, I could see the spectrum of faces, hope, despair, rage, resignation. The forgotten tapestry of our lives interwoven in this moment. Each face told a story. Each voice a scream for recognition. "I remember," I whispered again, feeling the tremors of history shaking the very ground beneath us, echoing with tales of resistance that had long been silenced. "I remember when we were told we had no right to dream." A siren wailed in the distance, slicing through the tension like a knife. The authorities were coming, their shadows looming, a reminder of the violence that often followed hope. Ilara stood firm, fists clenched, a warrior prepared for battle. "We won't back down," she declared, and the crowd roared in response, a primal sound that resonated with the beating of their hearts. Matt's gaze flickered to the approaching lights, fear offset by a flicker of rebellion. "What if they come for us?" he asked, vulnerability spilling from his lips. "What if they take everything from us? Then we'll take it back." Ilara shouted, voice unyielding. "We've lost too much to be afraid." And in that moment, she became something more than flesh and blood. She was the embodiment of every soul that had ever fought against the tide of injustice, standing resolute against the crashing waves of despair. I felt the pulse of the crowd, the desperation intertwining with fierce determination. It was intoxicating, electrifying, yet laced with an undercurrent of dread. The police were a metaphorical guillotine, looming over us, malice hidden in their uniforms, and yet here we were, the marginalized, ready to confront the looming specter of authority with our bare hands. "Together?" Ilara repeated, her voice a lifeline cast into turbulent waters. It wrapped around us like a thick fog, pulling us closer. In this moment, we were not just individuals, we were a collective heartbeat, a symphony of resistance against a world that had long since deemed us irrelevant. "Together," I echoed, feeling the weight of my own history melding into theirs, creating a tapestry of shared pain and unyielding strength. But then the sirens drew near, and the crowd began to shift. Tension crackled like electricity, the air thick with uncertainty. My heart raced, each beat a countdown to the unknown. Would we stand our ground, or would we scatter like leaves in the wind? The question hung suspended in the air, a haunting reminder of the consequences that lay ahead, teetering on the precipice of confrontation. I closed my eyes for a fleeting second, breathing in the moment, the mixture of fear and exhilaration, and I could see it all, dreams intertwined with nightmares, a world pressing down on us, suffocating yet alive. We were the ghosts of the forgotten, the echoes of struggles past, standing on the brink of something vast and wild. "Let them come," Ilara roared, a battle cry that ignited the fire within me. Beneath the layers of fear, I felt hope unfurling, a fragile bloom pushing through the cracks of oppression. And I knew, in that fleeting heartbeat, that we were not just fighting for ourselves, we were fighting for a future where the weight of social hierarchies could be shattered. As the sirens closed in, the confrontation loomed ever closer, and with it, the promise of a reckoning. The clock chimed ominously, echoing through the narrow alleyways of the city, each strike a reminder of time slipping away. No one dared to look up, not even as the shadows danced playfully under the flickering gaslights. I could taste the tension in the air, thick like smoke clinging to the throat. Lila stood there, heart pounding, the evening breeze raking through her hair like fingers pulling her back from the precipice. Today was the day she confronted the remnants of her past, those suffocating cultural norms that threatened to engulf her whole. She wore a dress that felt like chains, a deep crimson that mirrored a heart in turmoil yet clashed with the unyielding expectations of her family. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, a ghost whispering from the past, "A good woman does as she's told. You'll marry him, you'll be safe." Safe. The word was a dagger, piercing deeper as she remembered how easily she'd conformed, how often she'd hidden her dreams behind a smile. Across the cobblestone street, Jonathan leaned against a weathered wall, the dim light casting a halo around him, an unlikely angel trapped in a world of shadows. His gaze was fixed on Lila, simmering with a mixture of longing and despair. When their eyes met, it felt like a collision of worlds, the weight of tradition pressing down upon them like an iron shroud. "You shouldn't be here," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the city, slicing into her resolve. "They'll see." "No," she breathed, the word escaping her lips like a promise. "I have to choose for myself. For once." But the shadows danced a mocking jig. She could feel their choreography, the rhythm of generations past, the weddings held in churches where love was a contract, not a feeling, the laughter that echoed through family gatherings, brittle and forced, as women dutifully preserved decaying traditions. In that murky space between the past and the future, her heart thudded, caught in a web spun by others, too tangled to escape. What did it mean to be a woman in a world that offered so little freedom, so much expectation? The thought clawed at her, gnawing at her insides. She remembered the stories whispered in the dark, the ghostly figures of her ancestors who had married for security, their dreams swallowed by duty. Once, she'd thought of herself as one of them, but Jonathan's presence ignited something fierce within her, a spark that flickered defiantly against the suffocating norms. Yet, as she stepped forward, a shadow loomed larger, the figure of her father emerging like a spectre, his frown carved deep into his face. "Lila," he boomed, the air heavy with unspoken threats. "Do you really want to ruin everything?" A tremor coursed through her body, a raging storm of rebellion battling against the chains of her upbringing. "Everything," she shot back, her voice rising, emboldened by the igniting chaos within her. "Or just your plans?" "Your place is here," he thundered, the weight of generations trailing behind him like a funeral procession. "You owe it to our family, to your mother." And there it was, the dagger of duty, thrust into her heart once more. She could almost hear her mother's laughter, a soft chime that had always echoed approval when Lila submitted, when she played the role crafted for her. But now, staring into Jonathan's eyes, she felt a rush of something raw and undiluted. "I owe it to myself," she whispered, with a conviction that broke through the storm. The world around her pulsed, the beat of her own heart resonating against the wail of her father's disapproval. Jonathan stepped closer, his presence a lifeline in a sea of despair. "You can walk away," he urged, his voice tinged with urgency, the kind that made her skin prickle. "We can find a way." But could she? The weight of cultural expectations pressed against her, a tidal wave threatening to pull her under. And yet, the sight of Jonathan's determination ignited something fierce and wild within her, a flicker of hope that glowed like embers in the dark. The thought of breaking free made her dizzy, the thrill of the unknown danced in her chest like fire. And in that moment, the world around them seemed to still, as if even the shadows held their breath. She glanced once more at her father, the man who had wielded culture like a weapon, chaining her to a life not her own. There was fear within him, a fear of losing control, a fear she now recognized as a bond that couldn't hold her forever. "I remember holding your hand when I was small," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, the nostalgia bittersweet on her tongue. "You told me I could be anything, that I could be free. What happened to that promise?" His face faltered, a flicker of something, regret, crossing his features. For a moment, the man beneath the weight of expectation emerged, the father who had once dreamed alongside her. But would it be enough? The air crackled with tension, the weight of history pressing down like a heavy blanket. Lila felt the tears welling, the edges of her resolve fraying as the confrontation hung in the air like an unspooled thread. "I want to live, father, not just exist in the world you created." Jonathan took her hand, and the warmth of his grip ignited a fire within her, a rebellion against the past. She took a deep breath, the fear roaring against her ribs as she waited for her father's response, her heart thundering like a war drum. And all around them, the city continued to pulse, a living, breathing entity shaped by centuries of tradition, a kaleidoscope of voices and expectations that had woven an intricate tapestry of life. But in that moment, as she prepared to step away from everything she had ever known, she realized something profound. The threads of her life were hers to weave, and it was finally time to tie new knots, to craft her own destiny, free from the constraints of a society that had long dictated her worth. In the unyielding silence that followed, she felt the world shift, the air alive with possibility. The clock struck again, each chime a pulse of freedom, the shadows retreating like ghosts, leaving behind only the promise of dawn. The heavy silence cracked like thunder as the sun dipped below the skyline, shadows stretching long and thin. In the heart of the city, a marketplace pulsed with life, vendors shouting, laughter intertwining with the scent of spices and fried dough. But beneath this vibrant tapestry, a current of unease simmered, threading through three souls caught in a storm of faith and doubt. I remember the moment. It was a flash, an argument spiraling into chaos. Miriam, her headscarf framing her face like a halo, stood firm, eyes ablaze. "We're not enemies," she shouted, her voice slicing through the laughter. Across from her, Adam, the soft-spoken Christian, clenched his fists, veins bulging beneath the skin, a battle of words raging within him. And then there was David, an observant Jew, caught in the crossfire, his heart racing like a drum, echoing the tension that wrapped around them like a noose. "Why can't you see?" Miriam's voice trembled, the weight of centuries resting on her shoulders. We're all searching for the same thing: love, peace, a place to belong. But Adam's brow furrowed, terror mixing with confusion. You don't understand. To you, it's just faith. To me, it's everything. His words hung between them like a fragile glass ornament, trembling, on the verge of shattering. I felt it then, the desperation of their fear. Each pulse of their hearts mirrored my own, beating an uncertain rhythm, and I was straddling their worlds, torn between the echoes of their histories. Outside the marketplace, the sun sank lower, and a deepening twilight cast everything in shades of uncertainty. I remember the stories, I whispered. The ones told in hushed tones at night. The tales of our ancestors, of kings and prophets, of miracles and betrayals. Do you remember? Miriam's eyes softened, just for a moment, as if a distant memory sparked within her. I remember, she murmured, a haunting smile on her lips. A time when our faiths danced together in harmony. But the world crumbles when fear grips the soul, doesn't it? Adam's shoulders slumped, the weight of his own apprehension a burden too heavy to bear. But we're taught to fear the other, he confessed, the raw honesty slicing through the night air. How do you unlearn that? How do you look into the eyes of someone who believes differently and not see a threat? David stood close, a witness to their turmoil, his own heart a battlefield. I try to see the soul beneath the faith. I try, but his voice trailed off, the unsaid words hanging thick like fog. He was a soldier in a war fought on invisible fronts, and each day, the lines blurred, Christian, Muslim, Jew, what did it matter when fear and love intertwined like a double helix? A scream pierced the cacophony of the market. A flash of chaos, a scuffle, eyes widened, hearts raced. The fragile peace shattered as fists flew, words turned to weapons. In an instant, the laughter was replaced by shouts, by cries of rage and desperation. The shadows danced wildly, and I felt the air thicken, suffocating. I was trapped, watching as their worlds collided, two men and a woman, caught in a web of misunderstanding and fear, unable to break free from the chains forged by centuries of division. I remember the moment I grabbed Miriam's arm, pulling her away from the chaos, her eyes wide with panic. What will it take? I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. What will it take for us to see each other as human, not as symbols of division? And then, as if the universe itself held its breath, Adam's gaze met David's. In that fleeting glance, an unspoken agreement flickered, a spark of understanding. We're not here to fight, David spoke softly, each word a gentle plea. We're here to heal. The words hung between them, lullabies in a storm. I could see it, the tension loosen, just a hair, like a bowstring that had been drawn too tight. Can we find common ground? Can we embrace the chaos that life throws at us? Miriam nodded, tears glittering in her eyes, reflections of hope amidst despair. I chose to wear my faith like armor, she confessed, voice raw. But maybe it can be a bridge instead. And then came the slow, creeping realization, there is a beauty in our struggles, a profound strength in vulnerability. We were not just adherents of our respective faiths, we were human, flawed, yearning for connection. As the last rays of sunlight disappeared, the city transformed. Streetlights flickered to life, illuminating the faces of this triad of faiths, each illuminated by the glow of their shared humanity. A cautious laughter bubbled forth, hesitant at first, but growing stronger, an anthem of hope echoing through the night. Yet, the shadows loomed large, reminding us that the journey was far from over. How many more nights would be spent in fear? How many more lives would be touched by hatred? We stood amidst the remnants of our conflict, threads of hope weaving through the despair, hearts pounding in rhythm. As we took tentative steps closer, the world around us faded, and all that mattered was this fragile moment, a fleeting embrace of understanding, a flicker of light in the dark, a reminder that tolerance could be born from chaos. The shadows whispered secrets, and I knew this was merely the beginning. The city pulsed with the heartbeat of countless stories, waiting to be told, each bearing the weight of faith, love, and the unyielding desire for peace amidst the storm. She stood in the shadows of the harem, heart racing, her pulse a frantic drumbeat against the stillness of the night. Every breath was laced with anticipation and dread, like the heavy, silken curtains that draped her world. Fatima, with her dark hair cascading like a waterfall of ink, leaned against the cool stone wall, a prison and a sanctuary, all wrapped in one. Just beyond that door, the world pulsed with life, laughter, and the weight of men's ambitions. Beneath the laughter, she could almost hear the echo of her own heartbeat, a sound almost foreign in this gilded cage. Farther into the heart of the harem, Eileen, her sister by fate and blood, moved with a grace that belied the turmoil in her heart. She clutched a tattered piece of parchment, a letter from a lover whose face she had only glimpsed in dreams. The ink had bled and smudged, much like her hopes of freedom. "I remember his voice," she whispered to the night, "as rich as honey, sweet with promises he could never keep." The irony wrapped around her like a silken scarf, choking her. Life in the Ottoman Empire had its rhythms, silk and spice, laughter mixed with whispers of despair. Women here danced delicately across a tightrope of expectation. They were revered as mothers yet silenced as individuals, celebrated in beauty but shackled in fate. Every gaze from a man was a reminder of their place, every whispered word held the potential to either uplift or crush. Fatima, too, felt it, the oppressive weight of invisible chains. "I dream of the day," she murmured, her eyes tracing the outlines of the moon through the lattice, "when I can walk unburdened, when my life is my own." She could almost taste it, that elusive freedom, a sweet note on her tongue that turned bitter with the dawn. In the courtyard, laughter erupted, sharp and sudden as the crack of a whip. Eileen flinched, the noise cutting through the stillness like glass. It was a reminder that the men were not far away, with their grand plans that often left women as mere pawns on a chessboard they were not allowed to play. "You can have your dreams," the men would say, "but let them remain just that." Days bled into nights, a tapestry woven with silence and despair. Fatima yearned for something more than the narrow halls of her existence. She watched the city pulse with life beyond the walls, a vibrant chaos that whispered of love affairs and secret meetings. How can they be so alive, she wondered. How can they walk in the streets and speak their minds? Yet, the harem was a realm of paradoxes, where beauty was both a gift and a curse. Eileen often felt the weight of this duality. She was at once an object of desire and a vessel for lineage. "I am to be a mother, a bearer of sons," she lamented to Fatima one night, "but I wish to be a poet." What good is a poem when it cannot be spoken? In the dim light of their chamber, Fatima reached for Eileen's hand, threads of anguish weaving through their shared silence. "We are ghosts of our own lives," she whispered, a tremor in her voice. "We exist in the shadows, unseen." The moon hung heavy above, a witness to their unspoken dreams. The walls absorbed their cries, turning anguish into echoes. They spoke of love, of rebellion, of a world just out of reach, their words a soft rebellion against the confines of tradition, against the suffocating expectations that bound them. Then came the night when the air crackled with possibilities. An unexpected visitor, a man cloaked in shadows, his intentions cloaked in mystery. He spoke with urgency, eyes darting to the door, as if the walls themselves had ears. "I can help you," he breathed, and in that moment, hope flickered like a candle in the dark. But hope, like fire, can scorch as much as it warms. Eileen's heart raced, a chaotic melody of excitement and fear. "What if he is a trap?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What if he brings ruin?" Fatima's grip tightened around her sister's hand, the warmth of their bond a stark contrast to the chill of uncertainty. "What choice do we have?" she urged, desperation creeping in. "We are trapped as it is. Perhaps this is our chance." Their decision hung in the air, heavy and fragile, like the promise of dawn just before it breaks. Stepping into the unknown felt like jumping from a precipice, terrifying and exhilarating. "I remember the sound of my heart," Eileen confessed, "the way it thrummed like a wild beast in my chest, daring me to leap." The clock ticked, each second a reminder of the walls that held them back, a relentless metronome of their lives. The shadows deepened, wrapping around them like an embrace, a final farewell to their old lives. And then, as the door creaked open, they were called into the night. But the darkness outside did not promise safety, instead, it whispered of danger, treachery, and a world where they would have to fight for every breath. Would they emerge as the women they longed to be, or would they dissolve into the very shadows they had tried to escape? Fatima squeezed Eileen's hand, and as they stepped into the world outside, the night swallowed them whole, leaving behind echoes of dreams unfulfilled and futures uncertain. The dance of women in the Ottoman Empire continued, a haunting rhythm of struggle and survival, where every heartbeat was a defiance, every breath a testament to their fight against the limitations that shackled them. And as they ventured into the dark, the air thick with tension, the haunting truth of their existence loomed, a shadow that would follow them into the dawn. The stench of decay hung thick in the air, an oppressive shroud that clung to the walls of the narrow alley. It curled around the damp cobblestones, wrapping itself around the body of a child, a delicate, frail thing with sunken cheeks and eyes that whispered of hunger. I watched, heart pounding, as the girl's mother knelt beside her, shaking hands brushing the matted hair away from her forehead, fingers trembling as if they might shatter under the weight of despair. The mother's lips moved, murmuring what could only be prayers, but the words fell into the damp silence, swallowed whole by the relentless grip of disease. Here, in this forgotten city, the pulse of life was a desperate thrum, a beat that threatened to falter at any moment. I remember the sickening, shivering uncertainty that danced in the air. I remember the tales of plague and pox, whispered in the dark corners of taverns, where laughter was a brittle thing, cracking under the weight of the sorrow that loomed just outside. The very streets were haunted, ghosts of the living barely able to shuffle from one day to another. Elena, the mother, was a woman who had once danced with hope, her laughter echoing through the crevices of her home. Her husband had died of the sweat, a fever that burned through him like a raging fire, leaving her to fend for herself and their 2 children. Now, she clung to this last fragile thread, the child's breath a faint whisper against the crushing reality of their world. Please, please, her voice trembled, a fragile bird trying to take flight, you can't leave me. But the girl's eyelids fluttered, and I knew, oh, how I knew, that the kingdom of death was beckoning. It was a time when medicine was a lottery, a cruel game of chance. The streets swarmed with apothecaries, their shops bursting with jars of herbs and roots, each promising miracles they could never deliver. I remember kneeling before an old man, a wise fool with wild hair and eyes like molten silver, his voice a song of the ages. You must bleed the sickness out, he had said, a grave seriousness etched deep into his brow. Bloodletting, he called it. As if draining the life from a body could somehow usher in health. I remember the cold steel of the blade, the way it glinted, promising relief that was never more than a cruel illusion. Yet here, in this moment, I was helpless, a bystander in a tragedy that played out in slow motion. I glanced to my right, where Thomas stood, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched against the cold. Unlike Elena, he was a survivor, a man who had outlived the death that had claimed his family with its icy fingers. But survival had carved something jagged into him, a bitterness that clashed with the fragile hope still flickering in Elena's eyes. Thomas, I whispered, the word a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters. We must do something. But he shook his head, the movement a slow, deliberate rejection. I could see the weight of the world etched in the lines of his face, each wrinkle a remembrance of the bodies he had buried, the friends who had slipped away like smoke. What can we do? His voice was a whisper, heavy with the knowledge that had etched itself into his bones. As night crept in, shadows engulfed us, a darkness that whispered of death and despair. I felt the cold seep into my bones, an unwelcome companion. The flickering torches cast ghostly shapes on the walls, and I could almost hear the echoes of those who had come before, victims of the same merciless cycle. It was then that I saw the figure moving through the dusk, Bahila, perhaps, though more like a spectre in tattered robes. Her hands were stained with herbs and something darker, a truth that sent a shiver down my spine. She was a woman whom the rumors had painted as a witch, a sorceress who danced on the fringes of life and death. I had heard of her, the way she offered potions with a smile that could freeze a flame and a gaze that could ignite hope in the most desolate of hearts. Let her in, I urged Thomas, but he scoffed, the sound echoing off the walls like a broken promise. You think she can save her? She can barely save herself. But I could see the flicker of doubt in his eyes, the old wounds raw and bleeding at the thought of hope. And then I was moving, stepping into the darkness, heart racing, the air thick with something electric. I felt the weight of the moment, the bitter taste of desperation, and I knew, oh, how I knew, that if I didn't reach for something more, we would all be swallowed whole. "Wait!" I shouted, my voice a desperate plea. The healer turned, her eyes glinting with an otherworldly light. The world felt suspended, a breath held tight, and I saw Elena's face, crumpled in pain, and the girl, her breath shallow like a fluttering candle, fighting against the encroaching darkness. "Do you believe?" the healer asked, her voice an echo of dreams and nightmares, a question that hung heavy in the air like a promise. "Do you believe in the power of healing?" I wanted to scream, to claw at the walls of certainty that threatened to close in around me, but instead, I nodded. The fear was a beast, gnashing its teeth, but I would not be devoured. I would stand with Elena, with Thomas, against the tide, against the very fabric of despair. And in that moment, a flicker of hope ignited, a fragile flame that could lead us through the shadows. But the path was fraught with peril, the spectre of disease loomed large, and I could feel the heartbeat of the world echoing in my chest, a relentless rhythm that pushed us toward an uncertain future. In the grip of night, we stood on the precipice of possibility, haunted by our fears, and yet yearning for the impossible. I remember feeling the weight of time, the way the clock ticked on, relentless and unyielding, as the shadows danced around us, whispering secrets, teasing the edges of our resolve. Hope and despair entwined like lovers caught in a tragic embrace, and somewhere, deep in the darkness, I knew we would either rise or fall. The flicker of light was all we had, and we were desperate to hold on to it, to fight against the tide of despair that threatened to consume us. With one breath, we stepped into the unknown. The kitchen was a cacophony of chaos, the air thick with the scent of burnt garlic and simmering spices, swirling like a dark omen. Plates crashed, and voices rose in a frantic symphony as Emma fought to keep the evening from plunging into disaster. Her hands moved like a blur, chopping, stirring, tossing, almost instinctively, her heart thrumming in sync with the chaos around her. Every second felt like a countdown, the weight of expectation pushing down on her chest, heavy and suffocating. "I remember when you used to love my cooking," Mark's voice sliced through the noise, dripping with sarcasm, eyes narrowed as he wiped his hands on a dish rag stained with yesterday's meals. The bitterness hung in the air, thick and palpable. Memories danced like ghosts between them, dinners shared, laughter overflowing, eyes sparkling with the joy of food transformed into love. But now? Now, there was nothing but the taste of despair and resentment, as sharp as the knife Emma wielded. "I remember the last time you cooked," Emma shot back, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and sorrow. "You burned the pasta, and we pretended it was gourmet." Each word cut deeper than any blade. The flickering candlelight cast shadows that flickered like their fragile relationship, revealing the cracks they both tried so hard to ignore. Then there was Lena, standing by the window, her gaze lost in the city's glow, where street vendors called out their wares like sirens luring sailors to their doom. She was the bridge between them, her heart heavy with the burden of their failures. "Food is supposed to unite us," she murmured, almost to herself, but the words wrapped around the room like a noose, tightening around their throats. "I used to think that," Mark said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "But all it does is remind me of what we've lost." He placed a hand on the counter, knuckles white, the tension throbbing between them like a live wire. The hum of the stove filled the silence, and for a moment, everything felt suspended, frozen in time, just like the memories of shared meals that now felt like haunting echoes. Emma's breath hitched, the truth was a bitter pill. They had gathered around tables once filled with laughter and warmth, the air thick with the smell of roasted meats and baked breads. Family feasts where every bite was a love letter, and every toast a promise. But that was before the rift, before they had begun to devour each other whole, leaving only remnants of their love. Now, food became the battleground, a war fought over burnt edges and undercooked centerpieces. "I remember the way you used to season everything," Lena stepped in, her eyes sparkling with a memory we all cherished. "Remember when you taught me how to make your grandmother's borscht? The way you'd laugh, the way you'd say, 'It's all about the beets, darling.'" The wisp of a smile touched Emma's lips, and for a fleeting moment, the tension hung in the air like a delicate thread, wavering and fragile. "Grandma's borscht," Emma echoed, nostalgia washing over her like a wave, bittersweet. The ritual of peeling the beets, the chaos of mixing, and the joy of sharing, how had it all turned into this? It's just food, isn't it? She looked at Mark, searching for a lifeline. It should be more than this, more than us. Mark's brows furrowed, his voice low and shaky. It's never just food. It's memories, it's loss. It's everything we've tried so hard to hold on to. Lena, still by the window, let the warm glow wash over her. What if we try? Just for tonight? Let's cook together, like we used to. There was a tremor in her voice, a desperate wish hanging like mist in the air. Cook? Mark scoffed, his eyes flashing with anger. You think we can just pretend everything is fine and dandy over a pot of spaghetti? I remember dinners where we'd argue over the last piece of bread, Emma said, her heart racing, remembering all the moments layered like fine pastries. We shared food, we shared laughter, and we shared love. The truth resonated in the silence, the echo of hope buried beneath layers of resentment. Love, Mark spat, the word bitter on his tongue. You think that's enough? Love isn't a recipe, Emma. It isn't something you can sprinkle on top and call it a meal. Then let's make it a feast, Lena interjected, her voice a soothing balm against the sharp edges of their conflict. Let's make something beautiful, together. They gathered ingredients, hands brushing against one another, moments of connection sparking like kindling. The onions sizzled in the pan, releasing their sweet aroma, filling the space with a promise of something more. They worked side by side, heartbeats syncing with the rhythm of chopping, stirring, and seasoning. The kitchen became their battlefield, but also their sanctuary, a place where words could be spoken without the burden of the past. The laughter returned, fragile at first, cracking through the heaviness, a tentative wave lapping against the shore of their fractured relationship. They shared stories, the ridiculousness of their culinary disasters, the joy of their best meals, each memory swirling together like a rich broth, simmering slowly into something satisfying. But even in the warmth, the shadows lingered. Each stirring of the pot was a reminder of the pain they carried. Mark's hand brushed against Emma's, a fleeting touch that sparked something deep within her, a reminder of what they had once held sacred. But doubts crept in like unwanted guests, raising their ugly heads. Would this meal be enough to bridge their chasms, or would it only serve to highlight the emptiness that lay between them? I remember the way you looked at me the first time we cooked together, Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper. You were so passionate, like the food was an extension of yourself. Mark's gaze softened, just for a moment, the walls crumbling under the weight of her words. And I remember how we promised each other we'd build a life together. But promise is a fragile thing, like a souffle, one wrong move, and it all comes crashing down. As the meal came together, the air thickened with tension and unspoken words, the clock ticking mercilessly in the background. They gathered at the table, where shadows flickered like dancers, moving in sync with their heartbeats. Plates filled, steam rising like fragile hopes, laughter weaving through the darkness. But underneath the surface, the past loomed, an uninvited ghost at their table. As they took their first bites, a silence fell. The flavors burst like fireworks, blankets of nostalgia wrapping around each mouthful, yet the taste felt bittersweet, a reminder of everything they had lost and everything still hanging in the balance. In that moment, the kitchen became more than just a space for cooking, it transformed into a crucible, a place where they would either forge a new bond or shatter completely. The question hung in the air, stark and raw, could they find their way back to each other through the act of cooking? Or was this meal merely a last-ditch effort to stave off the inevitable decay of their love, before they too turned to ashes? And as they chewed, the silence stretched, thick with the weight of their fears and desires, the clock ticking away the seconds, reminding them that time was short. The battle was far from over, it had only just begun. A bell tolls, its sound piercing through the heavy air, thrumming in my chest like a drumbeat of despair. The schoolyard is alive, but the laughter is sharp and discordant, ricocheting off crumbling walls like shattered glass. Kids in tattered clothes dash around, their faces smeared with dirt, eyes glinting with desperation and wild dreams. I stand there, heart racing, watching a boy, maybe 8, his fingers stained with ink, scribbling fervently on a piece of cardboard. With every stroke, he conjures a world where he is not just a name on the school's neglect list, but a hero, a soldier of knowledge, charging into battle against the darkness of ignorance that looms like a specter over us. I remember the first time I saw him. I was supposed to be teaching the letter A. Instead, I found myself transfixed by his raw determination, a fire in his belly that could melt the chains of poverty binding him. That day, it struck me, education is not just a privilege, it's a lifeline. Yet, as I stand here, my own heart heavy with the burden of unfulfilled promises, I can feel the weight of 1,000 broken dreams in the pit of my stomach. Behind the laughter, a girl named Maya sits alone on the dilapidated steps, her gaze tracing the cracked concrete. She clutches a worn-out book, pages yellowing, words barely decipherable. I see her lips moving, a quiet chant against the chaos, but the words slip through her fingers like smoke. I know her story, a relentless cycle of survival, the cycle that has kept her family shackled to the ground, each generation echoing the last. She dreams of flying away, of distant cities painted in colors she has only read about, but the chains of expectation pull her back. She is a ghost haunting the corridors of potential, and I wonder if she even believes she deserves to escape. Why do you read? I ask her one day, the question hanging in the air, heavy and palpable. Because, she whispers, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, the world in books is kinder than the world outside. Each word hits me like a blow, cutting deeper than I dare admit. I see the truth in her eyes, the battle between hope and despair, a silent war waged within her soul. I remember my own childhood, lost in dusty libraries, the scent of old paper mingling with dreams. I had the privilege of pages, of teachers who cared, who believed in me. I want to tell them that not everyone has that chance. Not every heart can beat in rhythm with the promise of education. I remember days when I felt invincible, when knowledge was my sword, my shield. But standing in this broken school, I feel the gaping chasm between us, an abyss where privilege meets poverty, and the echoes of missed opportunities resound. The bell tolls again, but this time the sound is muffled, like a whispered prayer lost to the wind. I watch as the boy, ink-stained fingers trembling, hands his cardboard creation, the tales of kings and monsters, the battles between light and dark, to a girl in the front row. Her eyes widen, reflecting the dawn of understanding, and for a fleeting moment, the world feels lighter. But then, the weight returns, heavy and relentless, like an anchor dragging us down. Maya looks at the boy, and I see envy intertwined with admiration. She wants to believe in the power of those words, to grasp the fleeting hope that one day, she too could write her own story. But reality looms, casting a long shadow over our dreams. "You're wasting your time," a voice snarls from the back. It's a familiar voice, one that echoes the sentiments of the world around us. "You'll never be anything more than this." The boy's shoulders slump as the laughter fades, replaced by the suffocating silence of hopelessness. I ache to intervene, to tell them that these moments of creation are the very essence of life. That this boy, with his cardboard and ink, is carving out a legacy beyond the confines of this school. But the truth hangs thick in the air. Access to knowledge, to the very essence of education, is a cruel game of chance, and the odds are rarely in their favor. I remember the day I stumbled upon an old clock in a forgotten corner of the school. It ticked in a way that felt ominous, each second a reminder of the time slipping away, of futures abandoned. The clock seemed to mock us, time waits for no one, it seemed to chime. As I stood there, I felt the pulse of 1,000 lives, each second a heartbeat, echoing in the silence. Maya approaches me, her voice trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. "What happens if I can't read?" she asks, and I see the child within her, the one who deserves to dream without boundaries. "What if all I have is this?" She pulls the book to her chest, and I can feel the weight of her fear, the suffocating grip of anxiety. In this moment, I am reminded of the ghosts haunting our education system, those lost to neglect, to societal indifference. "Then we fight," I reply, my voice a fragile whisper, yet ignited with a fierce conviction. I can see the flicker of hope in her eyes, but it's tempered with the reality of a world that often punishes the innocent. I want to promise her that knowledge is a river, a current that can sweep us away to shores we never dared to dream existed. Yet, the shadows loom larger. As the clock ticks, time is a cruel teacher, and the lesson is often one we learn too late. With every passing moment, I feel the tension rise, the air thick with unwritten stories, dreams stifled at birth. I see the boy and the girl in their fragile dance with destiny, teetering on the brink of despair and hope. And as the bell tolls a third time, signaling the end of yet another day in this broken system, I know that this is not just about education or literacy rates, this is about the very essence of who we are, who we can become. In the fading light of the schoolyard, I hold my breath, waiting for the moment when the fragile threads of hope will either weave a tapestry of strength or snap, leaving behind the fragments of dreams unfulfilled. But as the sky darkens and the stars begin to blink awake above us, I realize that the fight is not over. The clock may tick, but within the depths of every child's heart burns a fire that cannot be extinguished. And in that fire, there lies the promise of a future yet to be written. The hammer fell, reverberating through the shadows of the alley. It echoed like a heartbeat, a warning that something was very wrong. I stood frozen, breath caught in my throat, as the smell of sweat and metal mixed with the dampness of the cobblestones. This was not just the sound of construction, it was the thud of dreams being smashed to dust, the sigh of a city gasping for breath under the weight of its own ambition. Maria clutched her skirts, her fingers shaking as she stared up at the skeletal frame of the building rising above us, its jagged edges clawing at the sky. "They're tearing it down," she breathed, voice quaking with disbelief. "Our home, our market." Her eyes, wide and glassy, seemed to reflect not just the crumbling bricks, but the very essence of loss. How many dreams had been whispered in that marketplace, how many hearts had raced beneath the archways? Now it was all being ripped away, replaced by something monstrous, something clinical, a sterile office complex devoid of soul. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everything would be fine, but the truth was like lead weighing down my tongue. I had watched the city transform before my eyes, a fevered dream of steel and glass, and I had been a part of it, an architect, a creator, a destroyer. This was my doing. My heart twisted as I recalled the plans, the blueprints that danced in my mind, promising progress but delivering loss. Even the shadows seemed to cast accusing fingers, reminding me of the faces I had chosen to overlook. And then there was Thomas, standing at the edge of the street, arms crossed, eyes narrowed, a storm brewing beneath his brow. He was a relic of a bygone era, an old soul in a city that had forgotten the warmth of community. "It's not just about bricks and mortar," he spat, voice low and fierce, like the growl of thunder. "It's about the people, the heart of this place." Every word dripped with a passion that made my skin prickle. I had known Thomas long before the Empire's aspirations began tearing our lives apart, and somewhere beneath his anger lay a sorrow that resonated with the fabric of our crumbling streets. He had watched his family's business dissolve under the pressure of relentless progress, watched the laughter of children playing in the square fade to echoes. "You architects dream of buildings," he said, his gaze piercing through the dust, "but what you're building is a graveyard for memory." A silence fell, thick and suffocating, as we all stood there, Maria, Thomas, and me, entrapped in the web of our own creation. I felt it then, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a collapsing roof. I remembered the nights spent hunched over blueprints, the exhilaration of design, the promise of growth. But what had it all become? A sterile jungle of concrete, a carcass of ambition. Maria's voice broke the silence, soft yet fierce. "They say the new buildings will bring jobs, clean streets, order. But what about our stories? Where do they go?" She turned to me, and in her gaze, I saw the flickering lights of history, of laughter, of love. "Will you build a museum for our memories, or will you let them be buried beneath your grand designs?" My heart raced, a drumbeat against the walls of my chest. Each thud echoed with the ghosts of the past, the laughter of children, the whispers of lovers, the strife of the struggling. I thought of the people who had lived and died in those streets, who had shaped the city's soul with their hopes and fears. The very architecture that I sought to perfect had, instead, become a canvas of erasure. And yet, the machines roared to life again, drowning out our conversation, drowning out our pleas. A monstrous entity, ripping apart the fabric of our lives, and we were helpless spectators. I glanced at Thomas, his jaw clenched, fists balled at his sides. Rage radiated from him like heat from a fire, and I knew he was contemplating a confrontation, one that could metamorphose into something explosive, something beautiful, or something tragic. "Enough," he shouted suddenly, the word ripping through the air like a blade. He stepped forward, gesturing wildly towards the machinery, towards the workers who labored tirelessly, oblivious to the emotional wreckage they were creating. "You're not building a city, you're building a tomb. A tomb for us, for everything we've ever been. Can't you see?" His voice was a war cry, a lament, a call to arms. I felt the tremor of his passion resonate within me, awakening a long-dormant part of my soul. I wanted to scream along with him, to tear down the walls that separated progress from memory. But fear held me back, a chilling grip tightening around my throat. What if I spoke up? What if I sacrificed my career, my dreams, for the ghosts that lingered in these streets? The machines paused. A moment of silence hung heavy in the air, thick with anticipation, with fear, with heartache. All eyes turned toward Thomas, and for a heartbeat, the city itself seemed to hold its breath. In that sliver of time, I saw the reflection of our world in his eyes, the fear of change, the hope for preservation, the desperate need for connection in a city that had started to forget what it meant to belong. And just like that, I knew we stood on the precipice. This moment, this clash of emotions, was a tipping point, a chance to reclaim the past or to let it slip through our fingers like sand. I was no longer just an architect, I was a custodian of memories, a guardian of what made this city ours. With every heartbeat, the walls of the city towered higher, more oppressive, yet also more alive. In that moment, I felt the weight of my choices surge within me, and I knew I could no longer remain silent. But the machines roared back to life, drowning out everything, and the moment slipped away, a fleeting chance, a shadow in the night. And as we stood there, caught between progress and memory, I realized that this fight was only beginning, and the battle for our city, our lives, had truly just begun. The gavel struck, a sound sharp enough to slice through the suffocating silence in the crowded courtroom. The air hung thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that clung to the skin, igniting a fire of unease in the pit of my stomach. I could see them, two souls tethered to fate in that stark room. Ahmed, a man who wore his heart like a shield, each beat echoing the pulse of an ancient struggle. And Layla, her eyes filled with stormy defiance, her spirit unyielding even as the noose of tradition tightened around her. I remember the moment the verdict was delivered. It was not just words, it was a death sentence, an oppressive weight that crashed down like a hammer against fragile dreams. The judge's voice trembled as he pronounced, "Under Sharia law, the accused is guilty." The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that reverberated through the walls, a chorus of disbelief that sent shivers down my spine. Ahmed clenched his fists, knuckles whitening, and I felt the anger radiate from him, a heat that could melt steel. His life unraveled before him, a patchwork of memories stained with injustice. He had only ever wanted to protect Layla, to shield her from the shadows of a world where her choices were dictated by the whims of men, by laws etched in stone and blood. But the laws, Sharia, customary, all tangled in an intricate dance, were unforgiving. They loomed large, casting shadows over the lives of those caught in their grasp. What about love? I wanted to scream. What about the right to choose? But the words lodged in my throat like a stone, heavy and bitter. Layla stood frozen, her breath hitching, a wild mixture of fury and heartbreak. "You can't do this," she shouted, her voice a piercing arrow that cut through the suffocation of the room. "You can't take away his life." But the law had spoken, and it was a language they all understood, one of fear, obedience, and deep-rooted tradition. I remember the faces in the crowd, some filled with glee, relishing the spectacle, others with sympathy, their eyes glistening with tears that mirrored my own. The gavel didn't just strike wood, it struck a chord that resonated deep within the human spirit, reminding us of our own fragility, our own helplessness in the face of archaic edicts. The air crackled with tension, a silent war raging between tradition and the desperate cries for justice. Ahmed turned to Layla, his gaze piercing through the chaos. "I did it for you," he whispered, the words hanging between them like a fragile lifeline. The courtroom faded, the people blurred into shadows as his confession rang clear, a haunting echo of love that transcended the confines of the law. I would do it again. But what did it matter now? The law had no soul, no heart to understand the depths of their bond. It was a ruthless machine, grinding away at human emotion, reducing love to mere legality. I felt my heart constrict, the sorrow washing over me like a tidal wave, pulling me under, dragging me down to the depths of despair where the light barely reached. The clock ticked in the background, a relentless reminder that time was slipping away, each second marking the erosion of hope. The walls seemed to close in, echoing with the muffled cries of those who had come before, those who had been swallowed by the same legal labyrinth. Ghosts of the past lingered, their stories unvoiced, lost in the shadows that danced across the courtroom floor. "Your Honor, I beg you," Layla cried, desperation clawing at her throat. "There must be a way. He's innocent." But her pleas fell on deaf ears, the judge's demeanor unyielding, his eyes clouded by the weight of precedent, of duty, of an unbroken chain of laws that offered no room for compassion. I remember the moment Layla's world shattered, the way her shoulders slumped, a warrior's armor stripped away, leaving her vulnerable and raw. The desire to reach out, to tell her that she wasn't alone, battled against the suffocating sense of hopelessness surrounding us. How many had stood here before her, begging for justice only to be met with silence, with a gavel that echoed like a death knell? As Ahmed was led away, the chains clinking like a morbid symphony, I felt a part of myself break. His glance over his shoulder promised a future stained with love and loss, a haunting reminder of what could never be. Would the law care for the dreams they had forged, the laughter shared in fleeting moments, or would it strip away these fragments of humanity, leaving behind only the cold, hard stone of legalities? With every heartbeat, the fracture widened. The courtroom emptied slowly, like the fading light at dusk, shadows creeping ever closer, engulfing the remnants of what had been. I was left with my thoughts, haunted by the echoes of their pain, by the relentless machinery of a system that cared for order but not for souls. And as the last of the crowd trickled out, I stood frozen, a spectator to this macabre theater, my heart a battlefield of conflicting emotions. I remember the flicker of hope that lay buried beneath despair, the longing for change, for justice that rang true. But in a world governed by laws that crushed the spirit, I feared that hope was but a fragile candle flickering in an unrelenting storm, always at risk of being snuffed out. In that moment, the clock struck again, marking the passage of time, a cruel reminder that while the wheel of justice turned slowly, it often rolled over those who dared to love, to dream, to defy. Ahmed and Layla's story was merely one thread in a vast tapestry of sorrow, woven through the fabric of a society bound by tradition, and as I stood there, the shadows deepening around me, I knew that their fight was far from over. I remember the stench, a nauseating mix of sweat and despair, hanging thick in the air like a funeral shroud. The marketplace was alive with chaos, a cacophony of voices, bargaining, shouting, laughter tinged with pain. Flies buzzed lazily around the stalls piled high with fruits and vegetables, vibrant against the backdrop of squalor. But it wasn't the colors that drew my eyes, it was the shadows, long and stretching, like specters of the past. Shadows of those who had come before, who had traded their lives for pennies, their hopes for scraps. Maria stood at the edge of the square, her fingers trembling as she clutched the fabric of her dress. She watched the traders with haunted eyes, memories of her father's laughter echoing in her mind, replaced now by the haunting silence of his absence. They say trade makes the world go round, but for her, it felt like the world was crumbling beneath her feet. Each transaction a reminder of the encroaching darkness. The barter of despair. "Do you think they care?" she whispered to herself, her heart racing. "Do they know our names?" She felt the weight of her family's hunger gnawing at her insides, a relentless beast that demanded to be fed. The desperation of subsistence living clawed at her throat, leaving her breathless. In the distance, she spotted Thomas, his silhouette framed against the dying light, moving like a ghost among the living. Thomas had become a trader, sure, but trade is a fickle mistress. He'd learned to smile through the gnashing of teeth, to sell dreams that could never be fulfilled, and still, he returned home each night with empty pockets. Each day, he fought the market like a gladiator, and each night, he succumbed to the unforgiving reality of his existence. The invisible chains of an economic system that turned humans into commodities. "I don't want this," he muttered as he tossed a few coins onto the table, a meager payment for the day's labor. But the coins were heavy, burdened with guilt and sorrow. "Why did you sell the milk?" Maria's voice cut through the din, sharp as shattered glass. "That was for the baby." Her tone was accusatory, but beneath it lay a current of fear, desperation gripping her throat like a vice. Thomas's heart clenched, the weight of her words choking him. "I had no choice," he replied, each word tasting like ash. "The trade was bad today. We had to eat or die," she snapped, eyes glistening with unshed tears. The tension hung between them, thick and electric, crackling with all the unspoken fears that had built like a storm ready to break. The ghosts of their dreams lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting. Around them, the marketplace pulsed, the merchants haggling over the last remnants of life. A woman, her back hunched with age, offered dried fish for a handful of copper. The desperation in her eyes mirrored Maria's, two souls intertwined by the chains of poverty, bound by an economic system that saw them as mere statistics. "Nothing left but scraps," she muttered. "And even those are too expensive now." "Cheap enough for a broken heart," Thomas said quietly, his humor a thin veil over the raw ache of their reality. But Maria couldn't laugh. Not today. The shadows pressed closer, whispering secrets of loss and ruin. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gold, and Maria felt the weight of time pressing against her. Each tick of the clock echoed her heartbeat, counting down to an inevitable confrontation. Between her and Thomas, between their futures and the ghosts that stalked them. What was left when dreams crumbled to dust? "I remember when we thought we could change it," she murmured, a ghost of a smile flickering across her lips. "When we believed we could make a living, make a life." "We were fools," he replied, but there was a softness in his voice. A longing that twisted in his chest, a desire to reach out, to comfort her in her anguish. But the world had taught him to hide. To bury emotion deep, deep down where the darkness squeezed it into silence. The marketplace began to thin, shadows lengthening, growing darker. The economy, a ruthless beast, didn't stop for the broken-hearted. It consumed and spat out those who could not keep up. A mother with a child at her breast, begging for just one more coin. A father watching helplessly as his son was taken, by hunger, by despair, by an economic system that had no room for compassion. And suddenly, it was clear. The tension boiled over, spilling into the open like a wound. "We can't keep pretending," Maria cried, her voice trembling with ferocity. "We have to fight back. We can't let them grind us into dust." Thomas recoiled, fear flickering in his eyes. "And what would that mean? What could we possibly do?" But even as he spoke, something in him stirred, an ember buried beneath the ash of despair. The idea of resistance, of a future unchained, flickered like a distant star. But hope is a dangerous thing. A fragile thread that could snap with the slightest breath. The darkness loomed around them, fed by years of struggle. The ghosts of their forebears haunted the alleyways, whispering of battles fought and lost. The night was pregnant with potential, every shadow a reminder of the sacrifice that loomed ahead. "Maybe we can't change the world," Maria whispered, her voice raw and trembling. "But we can carve out a piece of it for ourselves." And in that moment, the energy shifted. The air crackled between them, charged with breathless intensity. The world around them felt suspended, as if time itself held its breath, waiting for their next move. As the last light faded from the sky, the stars began to blink into existence, each one a distant promise, a glimmer of hope amidst the darkness. They stood there, caught between the crushing weight of their present and the tantalizing possibility of change. The market lay behind them, a battlefield littered with the remnants of their dreams. And in that stillness, with shadows creeping ever closer, a decision loomed on the horizon, pregnant with uncertainty, heavy with the promise of confrontation. The world might spin on its axis, but for Maria and Thomas, it was a defining moment, a choice to either succumb to the weight of despair or rise, to fight against the very fabric of an economic system that threatened to consume them whole. With their hearts pounding, they took a breath, stepping into the unknown, where the line between survival and rebellion blurred in the twilight. Here, among the remnants of a broken marketplace, they began to weave a story that would breathe life into the void, a story full of scars, struggles, and the relentless pursuit of a future worth fighting for. The sound of gunfire erupts like thunder shattering a peaceful night, and for a moment, the world seems to hold its breath. The acrid smell of smoke fills the air, mixing with fear, a violent cocktail. I stand there, frozen, my heart pounding so loudly it drowns out the chaos surrounding me. I remember the warmth of my mother's embrace, the way her fingers tangled in my hair as she whispered, "You'll always be my brave soldier." But she's not here now. She's a ghost in my mind, fading into the cacophony of war. Jason is beside me, his eyes wide, reflecting the terror that grips us both. He's always been the jokester, the one who cracks a smile when the world feels heavy. But now? Now, the humor has drained from his face, replaced by a grim determination that makes my hands shake. He grips his rifle like it's the only thing tethering him to reality, the only thing holding back the abyss that threatens to swallow us whole. I know he's wrestling with his own demons. His father was a soldier, decorated and broken, a man whose ghosts never let him rest. "I don't want to end up like him," he had once said, a tremor in his voice, his hands trembling as they traced the medals hanging on the wall. "I don't want to become a shadow." And there's Sarah. She's far from us now, but I can see her silhouette, the way she moves with a grace that feels almost unnatural in this hell. She was always fierce, full of life that burned like a flame. When she joined the military, she wore her uniform like armor, a defiant stance against a world that felt too small for her spirit. I remember the first time they called me up, she had laughed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. I thought they wanted me to lead a parade. But the laughter faded, replaced by the weight of reality. Every person in this battlefield was a pawn, every decision a cruel game of chance. The ground shakes beneath us as another explosion rocks the earth. I can taste the dirt and blood, feel the panic crawling up my spine like 1,000 spiders. I remember the day I received my conscription letter, the thin paper that felt like a death sentence in my hands. It didn't matter that I was a college student with dreams bigger than the sky, I was now just another name on a list, another number destined to disappear into the machine of war. They said it was for freedom. For honor. But what kind of freedom leaves you shackled in fear? What kind of honor demands the sacrifice of innocence? Keep moving, a voice barks from somewhere, rising above the chaos. It's a command that feels more like a taunt. I want to scream, to tell them that there is no moving forward when every step feels like stepping on the shards of our own shattered lives. Jason pulls me along, our legs stumbling through the rubble, and I can see the shadows of those who have been lost, their faces etched in despair. They haunt us, reminding us of the price we pay for the decisions made by others, decisions made by people who will never know our names. Do you think they know what we're going through? Jason shouts, his voice cracking under the weight of his rage. Do you think they understand the hell they've unleashed? His words hang in the air, heavy and unresolved, as if they are a prayer for deliverance from this torment. We are brothers, bound not by blood, but by the shared agony of being thrust into a world that doesn't care about our stories. And Sarah, oh, Sarah. She moves like a warrior, and yet I know the truth that lies beneath her brave facade. The fear of not coming home. The fear of leaving behind the love she holds for her little sister, the one who looks up at her with stars in her eyes. "Promise you'll come back for me," her sister had said, clutching her hand with a grip that felt like a lifeline. But promises crumble in the face of war, and I can see the flicker of doubt in Sarah's eyes, a fear that gnaws at her soul every time she pulls the trigger. The night stretches on, and each moment feels like an eternity. I can hear the clock ticking in my mind, each second a reminder of what hangs in the balance. We are trapped in a nightmare where the line between right and wrong blurs, where the sanctity of life is reduced to a casualty report. I remember the faces of those who have fallen, friends, strangers, all reduced to memories, to ghosts that will follow us long after the gunfire has silenced. As the sun begins to rise, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash, I find myself standing in a sea of bodies, their stories cut short, their dreams extinguished. The weight of their loss presses down on me, a reminder of the fragility of hope. I see Jason crouched near a fallen comrade, his fingers trembling as they trace the outline of a face he'll never forget. It's a moment suspended in time, a heartbreaking tableau of grief and friendship, of lives intertwined in a way that war can never sever. But the world doesn't wait for our sorrow. The next wave of soldiers rushes in, faces blank as they step over the remnants of life. I know they feel it too, the dread, the uncertainty, the silent promise that they may not return. We are all prisoners in this reality, shackled by duty, bound by the chains of a system that doesn't ask for permission to take our lives and mold them into something unrecognizable. And as the sun rises higher, casting long shadows that mimic the ghosts of our past, I realize that I am not just fighting for my life but for the lives of everyone who has ever held a rifle, who has ever felt the weight of a decision made for them. The military isn't a distant entity, it's woven into the very fabric of our existence, an omnipresent force that shapes who we are and who we can never be again. There's no neatly wrapped conclusion waiting for us, no clear resolution to the chaos that unfolds. Just the echoing cries of those who have come before, those who have fought and fallen, and those who will continue to march into the unknown. We are warriors bound by scars, by memories, by the relentless rhythm of our own hearts beating in defiance against the darkness. And so we stand, poised on the precipice, caught between the brutality of our reality and the flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, we might one day rise from these ashes, reborn into a world where the cost of courage is not measured in blood but in love. A world where the shadows recede. A world where we are free. A single flickering candle casts long shadows against the damp stone walls of the inn, where the air is thick with the stench of sweat, spilled ale, and desperation. The laughter of revelers is a ghostly echo, swallowed whole by the oppressive silence that hangs in the corners, as if waiting for someone to scream. And then I see him, Edric. His face is pale, eyes haunted, as if he's just returned from the abyss. He slumps into his chair, the wooden frame creaking under the weight of his fear. He pulls out a scrap of parchment, trembling fingers clutching it like a lifeline, and my heart races, pounding against my ribs like a frantic bird desperate to escape. "Did you hear?" he gasps, breathless as if he's run a marathon or fled from the Grim Reaper himself. "The roads are blocked. The watchmen, they're not just turning travelers away." His voice drops, gravelly and low, as if he's afraid the walls might conspire against us. "They're taking them." A chill runs down my spine. I remember the stories, the whispers of merchants vanishing into the shadows, of couriers never arriving at their destinations, their messages lost to the cruelty of the Empire. Each tale drips with a nervous energy, a cautionary tale that worms its way into your mind and refuses to let go. "You're not thinking of going, are you?" I ask, my own voice trembling, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. Edric shakes his head violently, hair flopping against his forehead, a wild animal caught in a trap. "I have to. My sister, she's out there, alone. I can't let her suffer. Not like this." His resolve flickers in his eyes, a glimmer of hope clashing against the shadows that loom ever closer. And then there's Mara, seated silently at the edge of the table, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug as if it holds the answers to the universe. She has been listening, absorbing every word, but her mind is far away. I can see it in the way she bites her lip, her gaze darting to the door. I know the look, the gnawing fear that something is lurking just beyond the threshold, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A silent storm brews within her, the weight of her own memories anchoring her to the past, a heart shattered by loss, a brother she will never see again. "Edric, what if you don't come back?" she whispers, and her voice is a fragile thread, taut and trembling. "What if they take you too?" Her eyes glisten with unshed tears, reflecting the candlelight like shattered glass. I feel my own heart twist in sympathy, the fear threading through me like poison. But Edric only smiles sadly, a ghost of the boy I once knew, and the smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Then you warn others. Tell them the truth. The Empire is choking us, Mara. They don't care. They never did." His voice trembles with the intensity of his conviction, but beneath it, I can hear the cracks, the uncertainty gnawing at him, forcing him to confront the abyss of his own courage. "Do you even hear yourself? They'll hunt you down, Edric." I interject, the panic boiling in my chest, a frantic creature clawing for freedom. "What about the letters? The messages? You think they'll just let you walk through their gates? They'll twist every word, every intention, until you're the very thing you fear." The words spill from me, desperate and raw, each one a plea to keep him safe, to keep him here, where the shadows can't reach him. But the truth is darker than the night outside. The roads are more than just dirt and stone, they are traps, mazes of deception where every traveler is a pawn in a sinister game. And then Mara's voice rises, laced with the tang of steel. We can't let fear suffocate us, Edric. We have to fight back. The fire ignites in her, fierce and blazing, yet there is a tremor beneath it, an undercurrent of doubt that threatens to drown her resolve. If we let the Empire silence us, then what's left? What kind of life is that? Silence falls heavy in the air, thick as fog rolling in from the coast. I can almost taste the salt on my lips, the brine of lost hopes and ancient regrets. Every heartbeat echoes through the stillness, pulsing with an intensity that feels almost alive. I glance at Edric, searching his face for some sign, any sign, that he understands the danger that looms just beyond our walls. But he is already lost in the swell of his own thoughts, the fire in his eyes dimming as the weight of responsibility presses down on him. The flickering candlelight dances, casting shadows that twist and turn like phantoms, consuming the very air we breathe. I remember a time when we were children, playing beneath a sunlit sky, our laughter ringing like bells in the summer air. Now the shadows threaten to swallow us whole, erasing our past, our memories, as if they never were. Travel is an act of rebellion now, Edric murmurs, the words barely there, barely audible. And every letter is a death sentence. The gravity of his revelation hits me like a fist, the chill of reality crashing over me, freezing my breath in my throat. The walls are closing in, the air thick with unspoken fears, and I feel the walls of this inn, our refuge, begin to tremble. The heart of the Empire beats like a war drum, a relentless thrum that echoes through the cobbled streets, drowning out reason, drowning out hope. Each traveler who steps onto those roads is a ghost in waiting, a silent witness to the cruelty that lies beyond the safety of our small circle. In that moment, we are bound by our shared terror, our unmistakable humanity clashing against the brutality of a world that seems determined to tear us apart. The candle sputters, casting a final flicker of light before plunging us into darkness, and I know, with a fear as sharp as a blade, that travel and communication have become more than mere actions, they are an act of defiance against an empire that wishes us mute. The door rattles, a bone-chilling sound, as if the shadows themselves are demanding entry. The moment stretches, taut with tension, our breath synchronized in the stifling air, hearts racing with the knowledge that life, in its most raw form, teeters on the edge of oblivion. Each tick of the clock is a countdown to the unknown, and the darkness outside feels alive, pulsing with the weight of our decisions. And just like that, the shadows that threaten to consume us linger, whispering of fate, love, and loss, swirling together in a tempest of fear and determination, as the echoes of our choices set the stage for what is to come. The air in the opulent room felt thick, a tension so suffocating it clung to every surface, a mix of dust, sweat, and despair. A single crack in the window frame allowed a slant of fading sunlight to spill across the floor, illuminating a tapestry woven with vibrant colors, a stark contrast to the muted existence of the souls living beneath it. Ida pressed her back against the cold wall, heart racing like a caged bird, her breath quick and shallow. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. I remember the first time the master raised his hand, she thought, a flash of panic surging through her veins, drowning out the laughter of the children playing outside. She could still see the glimmer of the ring on his finger, a heavy weight she couldn't bear, the symbol of his power, the source of her vulnerability. Across the room, Yusuf, a fellow servant, knelt over a small fire pit, the flames licking hungrily at the kindling. His hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the haunting memory of yesterday's punishment, a slip of the tongue that had left him hanging by his wrists, the world around him blurring into a haze of pain. I remember when I thought I could speak freely, he whispered to himself, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The flames danced, flickering shadows on his face, illuminating the fear etched into his features. Each moment was a tightrope walk, a delicate balancing act between survival and defiance. Ida! More water, the voice of the mistress sliced through the air, sharp and demanding. Ida flinched. The mistress's tone was a whip, snapping through the silence, leaving a sharp sting in the air. Ida hurried to comply, her mind racing. The weight of the empty pitcher felt like a stone in her hands, each step echoing with memories of servitude, of her mother's whispered warnings, of the chains that bound them, not only to the household but to the very essence of their being. In the kitchen, the heat was stifling, and the scent of spices mingled with the acrid smoke that clung to the air like memories of defeat. Ida's thoughts drifted to her brother, lost to the night, his laughter swallowed by the shadows of their past. What would he say, she mused, trying to conjure his spirit amidst the chaos. He would have laughed at the absurdity of it all. A bitter smile curled on her lips, the irony cutting deep. They bathed once a year. Oh, the romance was earthy indeed, but the laughter? It was a distant echo now, a haunting symphony of joy snatched away. Yusuf finished his task and caught her gaze, their eyes locking in a moment of unsaid understanding. He was more than a fellow servant, he was a ghost of her past, a fragment of a shared life that hung between them like a fragile thread. "Ida," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire, "do you think we'll ever be free from this? From their shadows?" The question hung heavy in the air, an unrelenting weight. "I remember the stories," Ida whispered back, glancing over her shoulder as if the walls themselves might betray their conversation. The tales of distant lands, of people who lived without fear, who sang songs that were not laced with sorrow. They both knew those stories were fantasies, woven from the dreams of those who still dared to hope. But hope was a dangerous thing, like a moth drawn to a flame, it could burn you alive. The mistress's voice rose, her laughter sharp and mocking, piercing through the fabric of their thoughts. "It's just a servant," she scoffed, as if they were mere shadows in the corner of her grand life. Ida felt a jolt of anger. Anger she had learned to swallow, to hide behind a mask of compliance. Just a servant, those words echoed in the depths of her soul, pulling at the threads of her existence. She was a ghost, a mere spectre haunting the corners of someone else's life, but still, she yearned for the warmth of the sun on her skin, the joy of freedom that had slipped through her fingers like grains of sand. "Yusuf," she whispered, "do you remember the stars?" She could almost taste the freedom in the words, each syllable resonating deep within her. "I remember lying beneath the night sky, dreaming of a world where we were more than just shadows." He nodded slowly, the weight of his memories cradled alongside hers. "I remember," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The stars felt like a promise, a distant whisper of something greater. But promises were fragile, like the dreams of the children who played outside, unaware of the chains that bound them. Their laughter was a cruel reminder of the freedom they would never know, a bittersweet melody echoing through the walls of the household. The tension in the air thickened, wrapping around them, binding them like the very chains they wished to break. Suddenly, the door swung open, and a gust of cold air swept through the room, a harbinger of change. The master entered, his presence commanding and suffocating, taking over the space like a dark cloud. Yusuf flinched, instinctively shrinking back, while Ida stood rooted, her heart pounding louder than the footsteps that echoed on the floor. "You! What are you doing here?" the master's voice boomed, and in that moment, fear slashed through the air like a knife. "Just preparing dinner, my lord," Ida replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. She could feel Yusuf's eyes on her, a mixture of admiration and fear, the fragile thread of their shared hope pulling taut. "Dinner? Or are you plotting something?" he sneered, his gaze piercing through her. In his eyes, she saw the reflection of her own fears, the haunting spectre of servitude that had gripped her from the moment she could remember. "No more." The thought surged within her, a wild force clawing at her insides. "I remember the stars," she thought fiercely, her heart pounding with a fierce resolve. The moment hung in the air, electric with possibility, a breath away from confrontation. And yet, the world outside continued to turn, a relentless cycle of light and darkness, a dance of shadows and dreams. The tension crackled, the air heavy with unspoken words and unresolved pain. Ida could almost feel the cosmos swirling around them, the weight of their existence pressing down upon them. Time stood still, a fragile moment stretched like a taut string ready to snap. The master's glare bore into her, a challenge hanging in the balance, the space between fear and defiance narrowing with every heartbeat. The echoes of laughter outside faded, and for a fleeting second, she felt an overwhelming surge of warmth, a spark of hope. She could almost taste freedom on her lips, a sweetness that filled her with both dread and longing. I remember, she thought, as the world spun around them, I remember the stars, and in that haunting moment, where the boundaries between despair and hope blurred, the weight of their existence pressed down, unrelenting, unforgiving, yet somehow, impossibly alive. The chamber is cold, its shadows swirling like whispers. A sliver of moonlight creeps through the barred window, illuminating the twisted faces of the courtiers caught in an intricate web of deceit. Each breath feels heavy with anticipation, laden with the unsaid, the unthinkable. I stand there, the air thick with secrets, and I remember the moment the knife plunged into the marrow of our lives. I remember the gasp of Lady Ilara, her porcelain skin pale, a stark contrast against the blood red of her gown. She stood frozen, her eyes wide, reflecting the horror of betrayal. How could he, she whispered, voice trembling like a fragile leaf in a tempest. This was not merely a political maneuver, it was a dagger aimed at the heart of her very existence. In the corner, Lord Thorn paced, his fists clenched, each step echoing the thrum of his heart, a rhythmic drumbeat of anger and despair. Betrayal sliced through him, sharper than any blade. Ilara had once been his closest ally, yet now she was ensnared in the conspiracy, tangled in a plot he couldn't yet grasp. The tension between them crackled, an unbearable distance cloaked in unspoken words. "Do you think he'll survive?" Her voice, low and trembling, clawed at the edges of my consciousness. The question hung in the air, thick and suffocating. We all knew who she meant, King Alaric, the puppet master, whose strings were drawn taut by greed and ambition. His reign was a precarious balance of terror and charm, a delicate dance on the razor's edge. Survive? Thorn spat, bitterness spilling from his lips. He's a snake, and snakes don't just survive, they thrive. He'll crush anyone who stands in his way. His hands trembled, a reflection of his inner turmoil. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, plotting his path through the treacherous landscape of the court. The air crackled with the spectre of the ordinary, the citizens beyond these walls oblivious to the storm brewing within. They loved their king, ignorant of the rot festering at the heart of the crown. I could picture them now, the baker with soot-streaked hands, the sempstress humming as she stitched dreams into fabric, the children chasing shadows in the streets. Their laughter echoed through the cobblestones, unaware of the noose tightening around their necks. There was something so cruelly poetic about it all. While we danced on the edge of a knife, they basked in their ignorance, blissful and asleep. I remember the jokes we told, the laughter that fled our lips like smoke, a jest about the king's latest absurdity. He bathes once a year, I had said, grinning, so romance must be earthy. How hollow it feels now, how absurdly tragic, as the laughter died in our throats. As the moon rose higher, shadows crept closer, twisting the faces around me into grotesque masks. Ilara, once vibrant, was now a ghost of her former self, caught in a maelstrom of guilt and ambition. "I did it for the good of the kingdom," she murmured, though the words felt like a feeble excuse, a flimsy veil draped over a monstrous truth. The people need more than a king who basks in his debauchery. Thorn's eyes bore into her, a storm gathering in their depths. "And what do you think his wrath will bring? Death? Ruin?" Each word dripped like poison, sharp and deadly. But as his anger flowed, I saw the tremors of fear beneath his bravado. He had loved her once, and now he couldn't bear the thought of her being consumed by the very power game they played. In that moment, I felt time shatter. Memories flickered like candlelight, a stolen kiss in the gardens, laughter echoing under the stars, promises whispered beneath the weight of the cosmos. But now, those dreams twisted into nightmares, the night swallowing the light. The clock on the wall ticked ominously, a metronome of doom regulating our fates, each tick a reminder that time was slipping away. I could feel it, the tide of darkness rising, ready to engulf us all. Ilara's resolve weakened, the glimmer of hope fading in her eyes. "We must act," she implored. "Before it's too late." Her voice trembled, breaking the silence like glass shattering against stone. But Thorn shook his head, despair etched into his features. "And what if we fail? The king's vengeance would be swift and merciless. We're but pawns in a game far grander than ourselves." The resignation in his words felt like a noose tightening around my chest, squeezing the breath from my lungs. A moment stretched, fragile as spun sugar, weighed by the enormity of what lay ahead. I could see the flicker of doubt in their eyes, the way dreams turned to dust with every thought of failure. The court was a lion's den, and we were the foolish lambs, believing we could wrestle power from the jaws of a beast. The silence deepened, thickening like fog, each heartbeat a reminder of the fragility of our existence. But beneath the fear, something darker stirred, a flicker of ambition ignited within Ilara. I could see it, a shimmer of steel beneath her vulnerability. "Then we play the game better," she declared, her voice a sharp edge cutting through the despair. And in that moment, I realized, this was the heart of political intrigue. Betrayal was not merely an act, it was a dance, a chaotic waltz between power and desperation. And as the moon continued its silent ascent, I stood at the precipice of a world caught between loyalty and treachery, love and hatred, light and shadow. The game was on, and we were all players, each step echoing through the corridors of history, shaping the lives of the ordinary. With every secret shared, every whispered plot, we wove a tapestry of fate, a dangerous, intoxicating web that promised both ruin and redemption. And I was but a spectator on the edge of this abyss, heart pounding with the weight of inevitability, ready to plunge into the chaos. The clock ticked loudly, and I felt the pulse of the court quicken, the air electrified with the promise of betrayal. The night was far from over, and the shadows were just beginning to stir. The ground shudders beneath our feet with a low, ominous growl, like a beast awakening from slumber. I can feel the tremors rising up through the soles of my worn boots, each pulse a warning, a portent of calamity. In that moment, chaos reigns, people scream, their voices piercing the air, mingling with the cracking of stone and the cries of terrified animals. I stumble, eyes wide, heart racing, knowing this is just the beginning. Ilara stands beside me, her face pale, a stark contrast to her fiery red hair, which dances wildly in the wind. She clutches a small bundle to her chest, a lifeline amid the chaos, her infant son, Thomas, asleep and unaware of the world tumbling around him. My own heart twists, a mix of admiration and despair swelling within me. How can she remain so calm? How can her love for this tiny creature remain unshaken, even as the earth threatens to swallow us whole? And then there's Marek, my brother, not far behind, his eyes darting like a hunted animal. He's never been one for disasters, always preferring the safety of the forge to the unpredictability of nature. "We need to get to higher ground," he shouts, and his voice cuts through the panic, sharp and commanding. He's always been the protector, the one who stands tall in the face of danger, but today, even he is a trembling reed in the storm. I remember our childhood, the way he'd scoop me up to chase the shadows of the setting sun, how he'd promised to always keep me safe. But promises mean little when the world itself is convulsing, when the very ground we stand on becomes our enemy. The memories flood back, bittersweet and haunting, as I grasp Ilara's arm, pulling her toward the hill that looms ahead, a shadow against the chaos. The quake intensifies, rolling over us like a massive wave, and I can hear the groan of the earth as if it's lamenting its own demise. I stumble again, my thoughts racing. What happens to us if this doesn't stop? What of the crops, the harvest, the empire that depends on our labor? Famine looms like a specter in the distance, thick and suffocating, lurking behind the immediate terror of the quake. "Run!" Marek bellows, and his voice breaks through my reverie. I can see the fear in his eyes, a mirror of my own. In a world where the ground can betray you, who do you cling to? Who can you trust when the very fabric of reality frays at the edges? I look at Ilara, at the small life in her arms, and my heart aches with the weight of it all. We run, our feet pounding against the earth, a frantic rhythm that mirrors the drum of our hearts. I can taste the dust, thick and gritty, on my tongue, each breath labored as I glance back, seeing the townsfolk scrambling like ants, their lives hanging by a thread. The buildings that once stood tall and proud, the market square bustling with laughter and trade, now lay in ruins, bricks tumbling like the memories of happier times. Why is this happening? Ilara cries out, her voice cracking with desperation. I want to tell her that it's just nature, that the gods are indifferent, but I know better. I can see her fear, the tight grip she has on Thomas, and it's raw and powerful, a fire that burns through the ashes of our despair. Because it always does, I whisper, my voice barely audible above the cacophony. I remember the stories, the great earthquakes that swallowed cities, the famines that turned friends into foes. We live in a fragile world, one where every day is a negotiation with fate. Suddenly, the ground buckles again, throwing us off balance. Marek stumbles, and I reach for him, pulling him back from the edge of a chasm that has opened up like a dark mouth, ready to devour him whole. Stay close! I shout, but my heart sinks as I see the fear in his eyes. He's always been the tough one, yet here we are, stripped bare of our bravado, laid bare by the very elements that gave us life. The horizon shifts, the sun struggles to break free from the darkening clouds that gather like vultures overhead. Shadows stretch and twist, whispering secrets of doom, and for a moment, I wonder if they carry the ghosts of those who came before us, our ancestors, who also ran from the earth's wrath, who tasted the bitter fruit of despair. Help! A voice cries, distant but familiar. I recognize the voice of our neighbor, old Mrs. Gwendolen, trapped beneath the remnants of her once proud home. My heart wrenches, torn between the instinct to flee and the obligation to help. Marek hesitates, eyes darting toward me, his own conflict evident. What do we do? He asks, voice trembling. The world spins around me, a vortex of devastation, and I feel the weight of every decision, every chance lost, every fragment of life that can be snuffed out in an instant. We can't leave her, I murmur, the words both a command and a plea. Ilara glances at me, and for a fleeting moment, I see the flicker of defiance in her eyes, the strength of a mother unwilling to abandon a soul in need. Then we go, she states, her voice steady now, the resolve igniting like a flame in the dark. As we race toward the cries for help, the earth rumbles once more, a menacing growl threatening to shake our resolve. What awaits us in the shadows of crumbled walls and fallen dreams? Time feels suspended, an elastic band stretched to its limit, and I can't help but wonder, how do we survive when the earth itself conspires against us? Every heartbeat pounds in my ears, urgency driving us forward, through the chaos, into the unknown. The air thickens with dust, and there it is, the chilling realization that we're not just battling nature, we're fighting against our own vulnerabilities, the fragility of hope amid despair, the eternal struggle against the relentless march of time. And as the ground quakes again, I look at Ilara, at Marek, and I understand, we are not merely victims of circumstance but survivors, warriors in a world that will always have its challenges. Shadows loom, yet even in the dark, we find the light. The air crackled like a live wire, electric and heavy as the sun dipped behind the horizon, drowning the city in twilight. Sculptor Ilara stood before her unfinished statue, the marble cold and unyielding. She could hear the whispers of the stones, feel their ancient hearts throbbing beneath the chisel. The world was collapsing around her, a cacophony of chaos, the cries of the crowd echoing like a war drum, the distant wail of a city on the brink of ruin. She had spent countless nights sculpting the very essence of beauty, and yet, in this moment of crisis, beauty felt like a cruel joke. The statue seemed to mock her, an unfinished promise frozen in time, just like her dreams. I remember the laughter that once filled these streets, she whispered, her voice a fragile thread lost in the night. Shadows danced along the walls of her studio, memories flickering like dying embers. I remember when art was a celebration, not a plea for salvation. Across the square, in the heart of a city that had birthed legends, the playwright Tarek wrestled with words. He clutched a crumpled parchment, ink smeared like spilled blood. The story he'd hoped would unite the fractured hearts of his people lay in shards at his feet. How can I write of joy when we drown in despair? He cried into the void, his voice swallowed by the thickening darkness. The streets sang with the songs of 1,000 tales, but tonight, they screamed of heartache. I remember the warmth of a shared laughter, the glow of firelight in our eyes, he murmured, gazing at the crumbling theater where a single flickering flame struggled to stay alive. I remember a time when words could change the world. What can a single voice do against the tide? In a corner, near the fading light of the day, Anya stood with paint-stained fingers, her heart pounding against the walls of her chest like a caged animal desperate for freedom. Each brushstroke felt like a rebellion, a challenge against the encroaching shadows that threatened to consume her. If I can just capture this moment, she thought, perhaps I can hold back the darkness. Her canvas was alive, pulsating with colors that screamed of life, yellows like sunflowers, reds like the flames of passion, blues like the depths of sorrow. But the chaos outside seeped in, threatening to drown her in its tide. I remember the promises of dawn, she breathed, recalling a time when creativity thrived, when artists were revered as the voices of the soul. But now, hope feels like a distant memory, a ghost haunting the very walls we built. Ilara, Tarek, Anya, three souls intertwined by fate, each grappling with their own demons while the world outside crumbled. As they faced their own creative crises, the echoes of their fears reverberated through the alleys like a painful symphony. Each heartbeat was a reminder of their existence, a plea for meaning amidst the chaos. Tonight, the city felt like a ghost, an echo of its former glory. Shadows morphed into specters, whispering secrets of the past. The ancient fountains, once symbols of serenity, now wept for the lost stories that would never be told. Ilara, Tarek, and Anya were but threads in a tapestry unraveling, each waiting for a spark to ignite their fire. I can't let it end like this, Ilara thought fiercely, her eyes narrowing as she gripped her chisel, determination coursing through her veins. The marble called to her, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. She could see the vision, a figure emerging from despair, a guardian of hope, crafted from her very essence. Tarek paced, the weight of the world on his shoulders. He could feel the audience's hunger, the desperate need for a voice to rise above the din. What if I write their stories, he wondered aloud, as if speaking the thought would give it life. What if I weave their pain into poetry, turning sorrow into something beautiful? Words spilled like blood, and he let them pour out, unchecked, raw. Anya's heart raced as she blended colors, each stroke a battle cry against the encroaching darkness. I will show them what we can be, she vowed, her spirit igniting like the brush against the canvas. I can capture the dawn, even in this relentless night. She let the paint flow, letting it guide her, each movement a dance of defiance against the despair that threatened to swallow them whole. The clock struck midnight, a haunting toll that echoed through the empty streets, raising the tension to a fever pitch. The ghosts of past artists lingered like guardian spirits, waiting for the spark to ignite their legacy. Ilara stepped back, the statue rising like a phoenix from the ashes, a manifestation of strength and resilience. Tarek's quill flew across the parchment, weaving together the threads of despair into a narrative that pulsed with life. Anya's masterpiece blazed with vibrant colors, a beacon amidst the darkness, urging the world to remember that beauty could still thrive even in chaos. As the clock chimed, a silence enveloped them, heavy and expectant. The crisis felt like a storm, swirling around them, but within that tempest, they found their resolve. Three lone figures, standing stubbornly in the face of despair, clutching their art like shields against the night. They felt it, the shift in the air, the delicate balance between chaos and creation. We are not just artists, Ilara whispered, her voice trembling yet fierce. We are the heartbeat of our time. And just like that, the night began to change. The city breathed, a murmur of hope reverberating through the darkness, ignited by the flames of creativity. The whispers of the past mingled with the promise of tomorrow, wrapping around Ilara, Tarek, and Anya like a warm embrace. They had not just fought against the chaos, they had transformed it, turning shadows into light, despair into beauty. As they stood together, the weight of the world still heavy on their shoulders, an unbreakable bond formed, a testament to the power of art, a relentless force that could rise even amidst the darkest storms. The city shimmered with potential, each heartbeat echoing the promise of a new dawn. And in that moment, they knew, their stories would not end here. The echoes of their artistry would ripple through time, weaving a legacy that could not be silenced. The struggle continued, the rhythm of creation relentless as the night deepened, but now they marched forward, not alone, but as part of something far greater, a symphony of the human spirit that would resonate through the ages. The ghosts of history stirred, and in the silence that followed, the city held its breath, waiting for dawn. The echoes of distant cannon fire, a dull thrum in the air, mingled with the acrid scent of smoke. I remember the stillness that followed, a silence so profound it seared into my soul. It was a moment pregnant with dread, a moment that spoke of betrayal and broken treaties, of alliances forged in blood and whispers. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that danced like specters over the cobblestones, as if the very ground beneath us mourned the fate of the empire. I had seen him, the emperor, in his gilded chamber, eyes glistening with the weight of 1,000 unfulfilled promises. He stood, regal yet trembling, before a map sprawled out like the shattered dreams of our people. His fingers traced the borders of foreign lands, lands that had become both promise and threat. I remember the way his voice cracked as he spoke of alliances with distant European powers, France, Spain, England, he murmured, their names dripping with the honeyed poison of diplomacy. Each syllable was a dagger, twisting in the hearts of those who knew the truth. They were not our allies, but vultures waiting to feast on our decay. Across the hall, my sister, Ilara, stood by the window, her silhouette framed by the dying light. She watched the horizon, a line where the sun met the earth, where shadows morphed into the figures of our past. "What will become of us?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, yet it echoed louder than any cannon. I wanted to reassure her, to wrap her in the warmth of false promises. But there was an urgency in her eyes, a desperation that ignited my own fears. I, too, felt the encroaching darkness, not just of war, but of a life diminished by the choices of those we had never met. The city outside was abuzz with whispers, the kind that slither through the streets like a serpent, coiling tight around the hearts of citizens suffocated by uncertainty. Betrayal was the currency of diplomacy, and we were the pawns in a game played by kings and nobles, invisible hands manipulating our fates. I remember the faces of the people, the blacksmith, his brow furrowed as he hammered iron, each strike a silent curse against the deafening silence of our leaders. The baker's wife, her hands dusted with flour, eyes glazed with fear as she spoke of rations dwindling to nothing. They bathed once a year, I thought, so yeah, romance was earthy. In the tavern, laughter masked the grief, mugs clinking together like the sound of swords drawn in battle. Yet beneath the mirth lay a tension that thickened the very air we breathed. I could see the barmaid, May, her laughter rising above the din, but her eyes betrayed her, haunted, searching for an escape from the chaos looming just beyond the door. "Haven't you heard?" she shouted, attempting to tease the dark away. "The diplomats are meeting again. Perhaps they'll seal our fates with a toast." Her jest fell flat, swallowed by the weight of reality. And then came the day of reckoning, the day I would confront the inevitable. The herald stormed into the hall, breathless, a messenger cloaked in dread. "The treaty has been signed," he announced, voice trembling, yet laced with a false bravado. "But at what cost?" The room erupted into chaos. Accusations flew like arrows, each word a wounding blow. My heart raced as I watched the emperor's face twist in agony, as if he had been struck down by his own sword. "We were promised security," he shouted, voice breaking. "What good is a treaty that shackles us?" Ilara, my bold sister, stepped forward, her voice rising above the turmoil. "What good is a promise made in darkness?" she cried, eyes ablaze with determination. "You barter our lives for a fleeting shadow of peace." It was as if her words sliced through the thick fog of despair, igniting the fire of our collective fear. The room fell silent, the air electric with unspoken truths. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs, an echo of her defiance resonating within me. But in that moment, reality crashed down upon us. Our empire, a fragile tapestry woven with threads of hope and betrayal, lay unraveling at our feet. I remember the harrowing thought that gripped me: we were just pawns in a game played by gods too distant to care. The lights flickered, shadows lengthening as the candles sputtered and dimmed, mirroring the flickering hope of our people. Diplomacy had become a game of shadows, and we were left to dance in the dark. Ilara turned to me, desperation etched in her gaze. "We must escape this nightmare," she whispered, clutching my arm as if I held the key to our salvation. But escape meant leaving behind the very people we had vowed to protect, the blacksmith, the baker, May with her laughter and trembling hands. A weight pressed upon my chest, heavy and suffocating, as I gazed into her eyes, searching for the resolve that had once ignited my spirit. And in that instant, a decision crystallized within me, born from the depths of fear and love. I would not abandon my sister. I would not abandon our people. Instead, I would face these foreign powers head-on, armed with nothing but the raw, unadulterated fire of our truth. I would fight for our story, for the voices that echoed in the taverns and the whispers that snaked through the shadows of our city. As the night deepened, a sense of purpose ignited within me. I remember the stars, bright and distant, like the hopes of our people, flickering against the blackened sky. They were a reminder that even in darkness, light existed. I glanced at Ilara, her eyes shining with fierce determination, and I knew that together, we would refuse to let our empire fade into the annals of history, lost to the whims of foreign kings and their treachery. And so, we prepared, not just for escape, but for a confrontation that would alter the course of our fate. The whispers of betrayal hung in the air like a storm, and we stood at the precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. The world outside was waiting with bated breath, and we were determined to carve our own destiny, even if it meant standing against the very powers that sought to bind us. The stars watched, silent witnesses to our resolve, as we stepped into the abyss, hearts pounding, souls alight with the fire of hope, defiance, and unyielding love. In this tangled web of foreign diplomacy, we would become the architects of our fate, for better or for worse, and the world would remember our names. Our story was only just beginning. The echo of a distant cannonade reverberates through the stony streets of Constantinople, shaking the air as if the city itself is trembling in fear. It's the sound of empires crumbling, a grim symphony marking the end of a long, storied reign. I stand at the cusp of history, where the shadows of fallen warriors whisper lamentations. The sun hangs low, bleeding crimson over a skyline that once sparkled with life. Now, it's a graveyard of dreams, a testament to a legacy slipping like sand through the fingers of time. My heart races with the pulse of the city, each beat a reminder of Osman, the proud warrior whose vision once carved out this expansive world, now teetering on the brink. The cold wind bites, carrying with it the scent of burnt offerings and unfulfilled promises. It is here that I meet Eileen, a woman with eyes like shattered glass, beautiful, yet painfully sharp. She stands at the edge of the Bosphorus, staring into the tumultuous waters, the reflection of a waning moon flickering like her hopes. "Do you remember?" she murmurs, her voice threaded with sorrow. "Do you remember how it felt to belong to something grand?" I can't help but remember. I remember the whispers of imperial grandeur, the opulence of palaces where sultans ruled with a velvet fist. I remember the laughter of children playing in the shadow of minarets, innocent in their ignorance of the storm brewing just beyond the horizon. I remember the day the news came, a disease, famine, whispers of betrayal in the ranks. The empire was collapsing under the weight of its own ambition, and we were merely spectators in a tragedy that was once a glorious epic. There's a heaviness in the air, a palpable tension that threatens to shatter the fragile peace. Suleiman, the Magnificent, whose very name rolled off the tongues of poets, is now a ghost haunting these crumbling walls. In the distance, we hear the cries of the impoverished, the oppressed, those cast aside as the empire rots from within. Harun, a soldier with a heart of stone but a soul longing for redemption, stumbles through the shadows. He is battered and bruised, a reflection of a once mighty force now reduced to a mere echo of its former self. "I fought for a cause," he growls, the bitterness of betrayal lacing his words. "But what remains? The bones of the dead are all I can see." It's a moment of reckoning, the clash of dreams and despair. Eileen's gaze shifts to Harun, the tension crackling like a storm about to break. "You were supposed to protect us, to keep our dreams alive," she chokes out, her voice trembling with the weight of her expectations. "What if it was all a lie?" The question hangs in the air like a noose, tightening around our collective throats. The streets pulse with urgency as the sun sinks lower, shadows creeping closer, as if the ghosts of the past are rising to remind us of our failures. I watch as Eileen's fingers clench into fists, her nails biting into her palms. She stands at the precipice of anger and despair, caught between the longing for greatness and the reality of decay. "Our history is written in blood," she whispers, "but it's our future that terrifies me." Harun steps forward, his voice shaking with the weight of his own burdens. "You think I wanted this? To watch everything I believed in fade into a distant memory? We are the remnants of a shattered empire, clinging to the ruins of our father's dreams. But we can't let fear define us." His passion ignites a flicker of hope, a spark in the darkness. Yet, even as I feel the warmth of his conviction, I sense the futility of his words, like shouting into the void. I remember the stories of the Janissaries, the elite soldiers turned mercenaries, once the pride of the empire now reduced to thugs in the streets, a cruel twist of fate. We were soldiers of glory, Harun mutters, staring at the horizon blurred by the remnants of twilight. Now, we are nothing but shadows. His anguish seeps into the ground, mingling with the dust of those who came before. The very soil of this land is soaked in the blood of yesteryears, a reminder of the sacrifices made in vain. Eileen's eyes glisten with unshed tears, her vulnerability surfacing like a tide that cannot be held back. "And what will we leave behind?" she cries, the haunting beauty of her voice cutting through the darkness. A legacy of despair or a flame of hope? Are we destined to be ghosts in our own story? Her words echo, ricocheting through the alleys, stirring the silence into a cacophony of longing. The night draws closer, wrapping us in its cold embrace. As the last rays of sunlight vanish, the city transforms into a haunting silhouette, every corner alive with memories, every street a vessel of sorrow. I feel the weight of history pressing down, suffocating yet exhilarating. What will become of us? Will we rise from these ashes, or will we surrender to the shadows? Suddenly, a cry pierces the stillness. The unmistakable sound of chaos erupts in the distance, clashing swords, the cries of the wounded, and the anguished wails of those caught in the storm. It is a reminder that the Empire does not die quietly, it screams. Eileen's hand finds Harun's, their fingers entwined, a fragile connection in a world unraveling. Together, she breathes, and it feels like a promise, a desperate grasp at survival. I stand there, a bystander in this unfolding tragedy, my heart aching with the knowledge that this is just the beginning. The decline of the Ottoman Empire is not merely an end, but a metamorphosis, an intricate dance between despair and resilience. We all remember, that in the heart of darkness, flickers of light still linger. The legacy of this grand empire will not fade easily, it will echo through the lives of those who will rise to claim their own destinies, each heartbeat a reminder of the past, woven into the very fabric of our shared humanity. As the night deepens, I realize that our stories are not yet finished. The shadows may loom large, but in the depths of despair, we search for meaning, for connection. The legacy of the Ottoman Empire, like the stars above, will forever twinkle in the vastness of time, a testament to the indomitable spirit that refuses to be extinguished.